Hello, I'm Justine Willis-Toms. Welcome to the New Dimensions Cafe. Today I'm hosting Mónica Guzmán. She's a journalist and entrepreneur and director of digital and storytelling of Braver Angels, a grassroots cross-partisan organization working to depolarize America. And she is the author of I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. I'm speaking with Mónica at her home by remote connection. Welcome, Mónica, to the New Dimensions Cafe.
Hey there, good to be here.
Yeah, good to meet you too. You grew up in a politically polarized family. So can you describe a little bit of what that was like and what led you to your current work?
Yes. Yes, it's not just what was it like, it's sort of what is it still like. Me and my parents are politically divided. They were visiting me here in Seattle just a few weeks ago, and there were still lots of things to talk about around immigration and the new administration's policies. It's been it certainly feels like a lifelong source of tension. I could not come home when I was growing up at school expecting agreement. Around the dinner table, there was always going to be friction. There was always going to be challenge, and I had to kind of be ready for it. And yeah, we've ended up learning a lot from each other, but also really turning up the heat, which is sometimes really hard to hold.
That was close to home. That was home.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us don't have that kind of polarization in our life. Everybody around us feels the way we do. We live in silos, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's our whole neighborhood is like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what you are suggesting is that we have conversations across that divide. So I'm curious as to how to even start a conversation with someone that you know. Like I do have a neighbor, for example, who is conservative. And so far, we have skirted any discussion of politics.
Mm-hmm.
But we have now, through the years, developed a really deep friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what would you suggest about my opening up that conversation with her
Mm-hmm.
that might even deepen that void in our life that we're not even talking about?
Yeah, and you are so not alone in that. There's a lot of folks who've just been kind of tiptoeing around it and wondering, would our friendship and relationship even withstand the question? And there are gentle ways to crack the door open and then wait to see what the other person does. If you value a relationship, then it's a two-person job opening that conversation, not a one-person job. So that's my first recommendation is look for a way to ask if you can talk about it, not just begin to talk about it. The other recommendation would be because you already have a friendship and because you're neighbors, that gives you an enormous opportunity to take advantage of another thing that research has shown can work, which is to talk while you're doing something. If you're out in your gardens, I'm making this up, but if you're out in your gardens, if you're taking a walk, anything that puts you side to side instead of face to face is a much more conducive context for, constructive, open conversations that feel less threatening, even if you're both afraid of what you're talking about.
I love that idea. And I know that in a recent interview with Michael Gelb, he said that same thing, that walking together, you're focused outwardly on the landscape or wherever you are. And it's very different than facing off to one another, is almost polarizing in itself.
That's right. And it can work really beautifully if, you're in alignment or there's already a lot of trust because you get to see each other's faces and you gain more data. That's all great. But when you're just getting started, bringing up something a little difficult, it is better to be, your attention is external. It's a little bit less of a threat. You're hearing their voice and you're accompanying them, but it doesn't feel like they're restricting you in any way because they're not. They never were. And they wouldn't be even if they were facing off with you. It's just physically we can feel a little bit more in position that way.
There's a little garden space where we live, and she's a wonderful gardener, and to invite her to that. And I love your idea of, first of all, asking her if we can talk, first of all.
Yeah.
And that's major right there, not just jumping in and saying, let's talk about your political views.
Exactly. Yes. And even, as much as I love curiosity, it's not always a great idea to just jump in with a question. Just, by the way, what do you think about abortion? No, no, no. Questions can be quite intrusive if they're not managed well. So, start with a more gentle question. I I know that you and I have different political beliefs, but we've never talked about it. And there's this one issue I just would love to know what you think. Could we hang out in your garden in a little bit and just see where we go with it? Something like that. Gentle.
I even think that question would be pretty tension filled in some ways. And I'm trying to think of another kind of question where I would say something like, I would love to know your feelings about
Mhm.
or where you came to your idea of being a conservative.
Yeah,
How did you grow up and what did you
yeah.
value and how have you come to this?
Yeah, no, that can be a better way. Also a more gentle on-ramp might be, you're in the world and you hear over a loudspeaker or you see a TV and it's showing a headline, and that can be your in, oh, there's Fox News, or oh, there's CNN, and yeah, what do you think of that? And that can be really casual, and she can say, oh, I just think it's this. And you go, oh, might be fun. I mean, I don't know. I'd love to hear more from you. And could we talk about that? A little note of caution around what was proposed a little bit earlier, this idea of sort of, I want to know how you became conservative and these things. To make that even more curious and really an open invitation, you could also offer to share what made you liberal, right? So that's one
Yeah,
person doesn't feel too on the spot, like being put under a microscope. It's like
right.
we could all be put under the microscope, and this is a conversation. Doesn't have to be a one-way interview, right?
So curiosity, that's the big one.
So curiosity depends on uncertainty. And so one of the things that's hardest in these days is not to hold very tightly and righteously to our own political side. There's a lot of forces pushing us to do that, like a sense of sort of belonging to one side, the identity that can come from that, and how nice it can feel to feel like you have a secure identity that you can protect. And all of these things have been happening. But when we surround ourselves with people who share our instincts, we will share our blind spots too. And what's happened is that we've become so divided that we're blinded. So we're stuck in this vicious cycle where we're engaging each other less while we're judging each other more. And so every iteration and repetition of that cycle means our judgments are based less and less on actual engagement with real people. And instead, they're based on the signals that we send each other about each other instead of conversations we're actually having with each other. That leads to a lot of hyperbole, misperceptions, exaggerations, which basically leads us farther away from the truth. So the only corrective to that is curiosity. The only corrective is to ask, wait a minute, what am I missing? Who am I not hearing from? Who do I talk about but never with? Let me use that to go find something that checks these divisions that are kind of the default settings of our discursive space with something more genuine and authentic and real.
You consented to be part of a interview by Glenn Beck, who is a
Mm-hmm.
conservative person who has his own TV and radio broadcasts. So tell me, what was it like to be with Glenn Beck, and how was that for you?
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little freaked out, but but that's because of the signals I get. I was afraid of a lot of things. I was afraid that he might come after me and be very hostile. I was afraid that I would be seen by my fellow liberals as needing to hold up their entire side all by myself, and that I'd be judged for not doing it to their satisfaction. I was afraid that I'd be judged for being on the show at all. The episode ended up being called "Why Would a Lefty Talk to Glenn Beck," which I loved. I thought that was such a fun headline. But during the course of the conversation, I remember before we started, I told myself, because there were butterflies in my stomach and And I was thinking, wait a minute, what I talk about in my work is how we can just reach each other as humans, and put our stories about each other in the back seat, basically, and wait to see what we're really all about. And I was like, Glenn Beck's just a guy. He's just a human. This is going to be a conversation. And that's the way I'm going to come into this. And I'm so glad I did, because if I had been too afraid, I would have had my guard up and I would have caricaturized myself, which would have been silly. So I think I succeeded in not doing that. But I lament the fact that I would have even had reason to come in so afraid of something. The first thing he told me before we even hit record was he made the connection that he had grown up, I think, in Everett, Washington, which is just north of Seattle. And he said, "Hey, you and I are from the same part of the world. You're in Seattle, and I was in Everett." I was like, "Oh, cool." So he started with common ground, and I thought that was amazing. I really loved it. I know you said, that I consented to be on Glenn Beck, but I was ecstatic to be on Glenn Beck. I think it's so important that we are able. I was honored to be invited to Glenn Beck.
When I watched it online, I realized that you all came to more agreement than disagreement in some ways. And that surprised me. There are some ideological differences for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But there was a lot that got highlighted there. And that's what you're talking about those sorts of agreements that we have as human beings. And we emphasize the differences, but we don't often emphasize the agreements.
Yeah. And then we forget we even have them because we don't give ourselves those opportunities to connect around them and reassert them to each other. And the one thing it seems that everybody across all politics agrees on is that the way we talk about politics with each other is completely broken. And on that, me and Glenn were completely simpatico. And we spent a lot of our conversation talking about that. The importance of people, thinking for themselves, for example. That was a huge point of agreement. Like, it takes time and it is hard. But I heard him as a commentator express his frustration that so many of the folks who follow him, just believe what he says. And he's like, that's not what I'm trying to show. Like, everyone go check this out for yourself. Don't believe it just because I say it. And that was one of the most interesting things I heard there.
As I listen to you, as I read your book, as I read other books and prepare for my own interviews, I'm finding that it's just expanding my lens of perception. And I find that personally exciting.
Yeah.
And I hope that others do too. Do you feel these kinds of conversations will change anything for the better?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they'll get across more reality and less exaggeration. So that's great because we all love truth. We have different lenses on some kind of levels of truth, emotional truth and interpretive truth. So the more that we kind of cross wires with each other, the more that it'll be easier to persuade each other of what the best ideas truly are. The more that we stay apart, then we'll sort of all become islands who it's a Tower of Babel and none of us understand each other anymore. It'll be really hard to hold society together that way. So it is absolutely a good thing. And I do want to remind folks too, of course, it's not for everybody at every moment with everyone else. You will discern, not this conversation, not this topic, not this person at this time, but maybe that conversation with that topic, with that person at another time, So you just leave that door open. And it might be hard, you might want to say, no, I just want to draw my sharp, thick lines and build my walls. But no, I think it takes a lot more courage these days to do the opposite.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for letting us into your life and into your experience of these kinds of open dialogues that can really change things for the better. I've been speaking with Mónica Guzmán, and she is the author of I Never Thought of It That Way: How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And to learn more about her work, you can go to her website, moniguzman.com, and she spells it MONIGUZMAN.com. Or you can get there through the New Dimensions website, newdimensions.org, where you can find over 1,900 programs in its archive. I'm Justine Willis Toms. I want to thank you for joining us on the New Dimensions Cafe. and I invite you, please do join us again.